headlines. NFL teams most likely to go from worst to first in their divisions. Bengals, Bears among top candidates. Trevor, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate you guys having me on the show.
I think obviously that's where we want to start. We know your draft expertise is up there. So when you think of the potential of Caleb Williams for this team and that rise, how do you envision this happening?
Yeah, I think the ceiling is very high for a rookie quarterback, right? You never know exactly how they're going to hit the ground running until things really start to get in motion during the regular season. But Caleb's got as high of ceiling of any quarterback that we've seen come through the league over the last couple of years. The Joe Burrows, the Trevor Lawrence, the Justin Herberts. I mean, it's right there for him. And so you look at the rest of the cast that that soundbite was talking about when Caleb says, hey, we've got all these great receivers. We've got a good offensive line. We've got a top 10 defense in a lot of ways that we saw from last season. You're bringing a lot of those guys back. And so a lot of reasons to be optimistic. I know that Bears fans are ready for a winner. Certainly the rest of the team has kind of been at that point, but just the quarterback position and the consistency has not been there. And I like what Caleb's doing, man. He's not necessarily fanning the flame, or I should say he's not necessarily throwing gasoline on the fan fires of the excitement for this season, but he's not stopping it either because he believes just like everybody else does. So we'll see how really the first half of this season looks. And if they survive that first half of this season and Caleb starts looking okay, man, we've seen what quarterbacks can do in the back half of whatever their first season is. The Patrick Mahomes, the Jordan Loves, guys like that, just second half of seasons, how they're really able to take over. And I think that's well within the realm of possibility for Caleb. We just got to see how it starts for him.
I know, obviously, when you're talking about Jordan Love, second half of the season, you're talking about this past one. But when it comes to maybe a comp for a first-year rookie quarterback, do you have one as far as that timeline you mentioned that maybe we would find familiar?
Yeah, I think to guys who are heavily recruited, heavily touted coming into the NFL draft from the quarterback position. And I don't want to look at Trevor Lawrence's rookie year with Urban Meyer because I think that was a crazy circus that thankfully I don't think is going to be replicated anytime soon. But when you look at that next year that he had, you saw him still go through some of those rookie struggles, but then man, there was a stretch in the middle of that second season for him where he got hot and it looked great for him. And it's been a little bit up and down, I think, as the rest of the roster is getting where it needs to be. And unfortunately, it still kind of was the case for them even last year as well. But to me, I look at that Trevor Lawrence second year path where, there's some up and down early on, but then he had, man, I don't remember if it was like 6, 7, 8 weeks where it was a stretch of him playing some top 5 football in the NFL in terms of the quarterback position. So when I think of a guy that just has that caliber of a ceiling and sort of the expectations for them, I do look at that second year from Trevor Lawrence and say that could be what we see from Caleb Williams in year one.
So those numbers, by the way, on Trevor Lawrence, completed 66% of his passes, threw for 4,100 yards, 25 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, passer rating of 95.2. I mean, that would be the best year in Bears quarterbacking history if it were to happen. So let me ask you this, Trevor. What do you think is fair? Because you know how you even mentioned it, how ravenous like the fans are for there to be some good quarterbacking here in Chicago. What's a fair expectation when you're talking about someone who's moving in from college and obviously is the Heisman Trophy winner a couple years ago? What's fair to say what's possible for him?
So in terms of the ceiling, like what is achievable, I think those numbers that you mentioned in terms of yards and touchdowns, that is fully within the realm of possibility. Now, expectation, I don't know if you necessarily want to use that, especially with the caveat that you said, that'd be the best quarterback season of any quarterback in Bears history. So you don't want to necessarily say that's expectation, but I think that's well within realistic for Caleb Williams. Now, what I would say you should probably also expect is that turnover number, or if you're looking at PFF data, specifically turnover worthy plays, that's going to be higher just naturally. Every rookie goes through these things. People talk about how Peyton Manning threw so many interceptions his first year in the league, and he goes on to be one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And that's just, we use that as an example to say Peyton Manning was still a rookie at some point, and he even still went through a lot of those struggles of, yeah, he threw for a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns, but he also threw for a lot of interceptions, a lot of turnovers. Caleb, that's kind of the narrative about him. If there's an area that he needs to really get better at, it's taking care of the football. It's balancing those superhuman plays with putting the ball in harm's way at the NFL level. And of course, that time to throw that everybody talks about, well over 3 seconds long, but was that a product of sort of USC's system, USC's offense, or is that sort of his play style? That's, again, what I mentioned, what we got to see in that first half of the season for Caleb Williams. That's going to tell the tale of, okay, is it realistic to expect a resurgence in the second half of the year? Or is he really just going to go through a lot of learning lessons in a full rookie season? So in terms of the total yards and touchdowns, I mean, yeah, honestly, somewhere between 3,500, 4,000 yards. I mean, like that is well within the realm of possibility for him, something between 20, 25 touchdowns. I think that could also be realistic. But those turnover-worthy plays, I don't expect that to be single digits for him. I think he's going to go through a lot of growing pains in the turnover category as well. So you're just going to have to ride with the good and the bad for him this rookie year.
I also am curious what you think of just the sheer numbers that the Bears had in their draft class this year. 5 total picks, of course, 2 in the top 10 in Caleb and Rome Odunze. But how can you see that number, especially when one was given to a special teams player in Torrey Taylor, affecting a team potentially?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the rest of the Bears roster is kind of there, right? When we went into those pre-draft discussions looking at, what each team needed, even beyond just total team needs, you want to take a look at the health of the roster, not just for 2024, but moving forward. Since Ryan Poles has become the general manager of the Bears, he's really been given the time to put his fingerprints all around the roster. There's a lot of guys that either he brought in himself or he drafted. It's the majority of the starters now or the core of that roster. So with that being said, you kind of look at the Bears like in January and February when you're evaluating some free agency plans for them, some draft plans, and you go, okay, are they a perfect team? Are they the most talented team on paper? No. But a lot of their chips are on the table. A lot of their bets have been made, whether it's in the offensive or defensive trenches, some of the guys that they've brought in or drafted in the secondary, guys that they've traded for on the offensive side of the ball. Not that they can't continue to get better and not that they can't improve the overall talent on the roster, but a lot of that is already there for them. So I don't hate the fact that they have a very few number of picks this past draft because this team was sort of already set up the way that it was going to be in 2024 anyway. So you didn't need this 11-man draft class or something like that. You just needed the high impact ones. You needed the guys who were going to raise the ceiling. And I think they did a phenomenal job with, I'll say all 5 selections. Obviously, it depends on how Taylor plays and what you think the value is of a punter, but obviously, Caleb can change the whole franchise. What Rome Odunze now creates is a triforce of all-pro potential wide receivers. I loved Kieran Amagaji. I thought he was a steal for them where they got him, the guy who could play guard, a guy who could play tackle, and then getting Austin Booker later in the draft. I wasn't the biggest fan of Booker going top 50, top 60, like some people had him. But to get him on day 3, I mean, that's a great bet to make, especially for a guy who was only a redshirt sophomore, only had 1 year of starting experience at Kansas, but was able to show a lot of those flashes as a pass rusher. Like, those are all really great ceiling type of bets that you would want them to make. So even though it was low in number, I thought it was fine for where the Bears are and exactly what they needed for 2024 and beyond.
Trevor, I know that PFF is not a monolith, and one of the things in the rankings for this season, PFF I think had the Bears 20th, and part of the reason was because of the offensive and defensive line. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think of the Bears' offensive line, and where can it get better if you don't think it's great?
Yeah, I mean, it's a unit that I think on both sides of the ball that guys have potential that just hasn't really come together as a cohesive unit yet, right? I think that they've got a lot of guys in the middle, especially on the interior of their defensive line, who I think they're good run stuffers. I think they're strong players, but are any of those guys really going to get after the passer? I know there's some hope for Gervon Dexter, former 5-star defensive lineman from Florida, but he was somebody who I graduated from the University of Florida, so I saw a lot of him. He always just seemed like a really stout, strong, long defensive lineman who I'm not sure pass rushing was ever going to be his thing. So you look at the defensive line now and you go, okay, there's a reason why Montez Sweat kind of carried that group, even though he was only there for half the season. You need other guys to really step up. I think the Bears were going in the right direction last year along the defensive line, especially since Sweat came over. But like, that can't be it. It's got to get better than that if you want to get to exactly where you want to go to, going up against the Detroit Lions for a division title, making it to the playoffs over the next couple of years. And I think the offensive line is the same way. There was a lot of talk of, what do you do with Braxton Jones? Do you move on from him? Are you okay with him at tackle? I'm okay with him at tackle. I like Darnell Wright a lot the year that he came out, so I think he's going to develop into a really good starting offensive tackle in this league. And then you just got to figure out who's going to be the most healthy and who's going to give you the most consistent chemistry and continuity along the interior offensive line. And I think that's what it's really all about. To me, the reason why you make those statements of the offensive and defensive lines are the two areas where we still need to see a lot of improvement from them. It's the interior part of it. Are you going to be able to get those flashes of pass rush from the interior defensive linemen that are on the team right now? Are you able to get that consistency from the interior parts of the offensive line as well? Because an underrated part of what feels like every championship team, every playoff caliber team, is that they're healthy and they've got great chemistry along the offensive line. For the majority of the season, it is the same 5 guys that are playing the same 5 spots. And it's just, it is a underreported, under-talked about reason why offenses are able to have a lot of growing success to play their best ball in December and into January. So those, to me, are those 2 questions in the trenches that would have to be answered to really move them up further on that list.
I appreciate you talking about that because of how much we heard this particular draft class that just occurred was rich in offensive linemen, specifically tackle. So how do you evaluate that, knowing what you knew about this group moving forward into the season?
I think that the offensive tackle class was a really good one, but I was somebody who, again, I was really high on Darnell Wright when he was coming out a couple years ago. I think that he could be a fantastic starting offensive tackle in this league. Yes, maybe you could have upgraded that left tackle spot of Braxton Jones, but I think he's been fine. And I think there's still some room to grow for him to be that starting caliber offensive tackle for you. And so that was kind of the debate, right? Do you go with the offensive tackle at number 9? Do you go with Rome Odunze if he's there? I like the fact that they went with Rome Odunze, because you've got DJ Moore. You hope you have him for the long haul. You got to steal and being able to trade for a guy like Keenan Allen. But, Keenan Allen getting up there in age, you're not sure exactly how much more time that he's going to be able to play at an elite level. So it's a really great transition to still have a 1-2, at the very least, strong wide receiver group moving forward for Caleb Williams, which is really, really important. And the thing about making that bet and being able to have that great offensive weapon is, look at the wide receivers around the NFL, right? I think when you talk about trends and impacts on teams, following the money is something that is valuable. And you watch Justin Jefferson just sign a contract to be the richest non-quarterback in the NFL, right? CeeDee Lamb's going to get close to that as well. A.J. Brown signed his deal not too long ago. Jamar Chase is going to be right there as well. So I think that tells you that wide receiver value at the very top for a player who is as talented as Rome Odunze is, they think maybe he can get there, be worthy of that. That holds so much value to a team. And we often talk about like, oh, no, it's just, it's quarterbacks and trench players. The game is getting so spread out and so fast that these wide receivers are very clearly becoming just as valuable in some situations. So I like the fact that they went wide receiver, especially with it being Rome Odunze at number 9 and letting Braxton Jones continue to play left tackle, because even though it was a great tackle class last year, you still might have something there with him. You're giving him another year to ride with it at that spot. And if he doesn't pan out, you go and you do everything you can to draft another one next year. So I actually like the way that they made their bets this year when it came to this draft in those positions.
Trevor, thanks so much for joining us, man. We appreciate your time.
Appreciate it, guys. Anytime.
Thanks,
Trevor Sikkema of Pro Football Focus is a really interesting stuff. You can follow him at Tampa Bay Trey if you'd like to. You know what I think is interesting is something to track going forward. There are a lot of people who think that Caleb Williams can have big numbers. And a lot of those people are concerned about the Bears' offensive line. And at some point, those two things butt heads.
Oh, wait, I think at all the points. Basically, actually the snap. We can just start there.
Yeah, literally, with questions about that. It's something to keep in mind. Like, Caleb's not in a vacuum. Like, if you think that Caleb is really good and could push his way towards the records of Bears passers this season, remember that there's still a team that he's playing on and guys that are in front of him.
And frankly, some of the struggles that he had his last season are also indicative of similar issues that could occur.
Now, maybe
Health of surrounding teammates,
I just
health
think
of
that
line.
it's interesting that people have concerns about the Bears' offensive line. Like, I think that should add to your concern about Caleb. But we'll see. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the off-platform plays, the off-time plays will make up for it because he's creative outside of the pocket. To me, I told this to Trista a couple weeks ago. If Caleb Williams has a season where he throws for 3,500 yards, you should be ecstatic.
That would be incredible.
That would be the fourth best season in Bears history.
There it is.
So just keep all of that in mind.
Well, and I'm also curious, when I asked him about the tackle class, I wasn't necessarily asking Trevor about the Bears. Because to me, I think there are a lot of times where you say, oh, this year is rich in this position. This year is rich in this position. And then you have to evaluate it a couple years down the line. So to me, I'm like, okay, well, if you thought that this class was so rich in tackles, how are you going to say that really helps some teams?